Hi, this is the Teens Creative Writing Masterclass created by teens for teens to support the stories of tomorrow. The goal of this masterclass is to provide teen writers with the knowledge and opportunity to get their work out into the world and begin publishing. The first unit we'll be discussing is the fundamentals of storytelling. So who are we? Well, we're 4 students in the Creative Writing Conservatory at the Orange County School of the Arts. I'm Christina Miles. I'm a senior within the Creative Writing Conservatory, and I like historical fiction, poetry, and Earl Grey tea.
And I'm Caitlin Vu, and I'm also a senior in the conservatory, and I love video games and painting. While we have 2 other members who are excited to meet you guys, today Christina and I will be leading you through this first unit. We're going to be covering story structure, character development, setting, and atmosphere today. To properly understand story structure, it's best to be an expert at the elements of a story. Exposition introduces the status quo of a protagonist's world. This is a stage where the readers are introduced to the beginning of the story. What type of life is the protagonist living? Inciting incident is the protagonist's call to action. In this stage, an event of some sort will happen that forces the protagonist to shift away from their daily world. The status quo changes and the protagonist begins their journey. Rising action is the moment where tensions rise and the protagonist must figure out what to do when all seems lost. They'll make their way through multiple challenges to find that one last path to victory.
Next, we have the climax of our story. So this is when the main conflict reaches its peak and all tensions are higher than ever. This doesn't have to be an action-packed sequence or a fight scene. In actuality, it's just the moment where the protagonist undergoes an extreme personal change. Then you have the falling action, which is the aftermath of the climax where we have realized and reflected. For example, this could be after Bilbo gets rid of the ring and fights the dragon, or after Harry Potter defeats Voldemort. It's a moment where tensions release, and it's a moment of catharsis for both the viewer and the protagonist. Then we have the resolution, in which the story comes to some sort of a conclusion. We, as an audience, have to realize what we've learned or taken away from the story.
Here's a chart to present what the story structure is. The tensions rise as we approach the climax, then slowly decrease as we make our way to the resolution.
All of this, both the exposition, rising action, and resolution, are driven by a character. A good character makes a good story. So if we know what makes a good story, what makes a good character? The answer is development. So you have to think of writing as putting your character up a tree and then forcing them to face their worst fears in order to get down and find a way back down again.
So what exactly is character development? It's identifying your character's wants, needs, and fears, forcing your character to face these wants, needs, and fears, and showing how these have changed and developed over the course of the story. Knowing what your character's wants, needs, and fears are allow you to create an effective plot that challenges them to fulfill their destinies. They are forced to go after their want, but they will only get there if they face their fears. And after doing so, their fears show them what they really need. For example, Katniss Everdeen from the Hunger Games. Katniss wants to take down the Capitol because of the injustice the districts face, especially District 12. However, she fears that by doing so and allowing herself to be a revolutionary, she might endanger her family members and those close to her, like Prim or Peeta. But as she gains allies and becomes a part of the resistance, she finds out that what she needed all along was to make bonds with others and learn how to trust others instead of being independent.
In order for your character to develop, you need to know their core traits as well as how this guides development. Theoretically, if you could surmise your character into one adjective, such as rebellious, this adjective should change by the end of your story. So, if your character was rebellious, maybe after their arc, they are content. To figure out what these core traits are, you should start figuring out who your character is. First, we want to know who your character is and what is their role within your story. Are they the protagonist? Are they the antagonist? Do they have any family or siblings? And if so, who are they within their family? Second, you want to understand how their role impacts the environment and perspective of that environment. So, what is their job? If they are a protagonist, are they an idealistic protagonist meant to save the world, or are they a disgruntled antagonist who views the world not worth saving? Where do they live? Are they a social outcast? These are questions you need to ask yourself in order to figure out more of how they would see your world through their eyes. Finally, we need to understand their greatest strength and flaw. This is probably the most important part of character development. How does their strengths and flaws impact the plot? Do they trust too easily? Or do they not trust enough? What is something they struggle with understanding or coping with? For example, what if they're like Percy Jackson, whose greatest strength and flaw is that they're loyal to a fault? Or maybe they're like Hermione, whose strength and flaw is that she may be brilliant, but she's overcautious.
Setting is another key element in the fundamentals of storytelling, as the setting of your story can impact the tone and the pathway the protagonist might take. To help with developing world-building skills, you can follow along as we create our own world. To get a solid foundation for your world, ask yourself multiple what-if questions. These can help you establish the boundaries of your world, the backstory, and the characteristics of the people living there.
For example, what if it rained every day? What could you do in a world that rained every day? And what can't you do? After you figured out what is possible and impossible in your world, you need to understand the history of it to really immerse your reader. So what if there was a war? What does that result in within political climates? And how does our protagonist interact with the world that was having a war? And what are those current events? Finally, you need to ask yourself what makes your world and the characters who live in it really different from the current ones we live in. What if humans didn't exist in our world that rained every day? So who are our characters? What is this species and how is it different from us? And what do these characters wear and how do they speak? Do they speak English or do they speak Elven?
Another thing to consider in your story setting is the atmosphere of it. The atmosphere you choose to set for your story can impact the mood, the characterization, and the theme. Does your story take place in a misty forest? Then the mood is most likely to be gloomy or mysterious. Depending on the setting you chose for your protagonist's world, the character will be shifted by it. Having them grow up in a dark cave will be different from having them be raised on a sunny farm. And setting can also allude to what the theme of the story may be. The atmosphere can tell us what we should take from the story.
All of what we've previously discussed actually impacts each other and is used to strengthen your story. So as you write, you need to be asking yourself a central question. How does all of this, the character development, the plot, the setting, impacts each other? How does a plot result in character development? And how does character development result in a plot? So you have to think about it as actually a game of Ring Around the Rosie. In that game, everybody links arms together and runs in a big circle. It's the momentum of us running together and having our arms connected that allows us to play this game. Writing is similar. If you link all the different aspects of your story together, you can keep the momentum of that story circulating. It is this momentum that propels a reader to want to continue reading your story. And then after the game is over and we all fall down and reach a resolution, then a reader or audience member is able to pick apart the different aspects of a story that really makes it as strong as it is.
Now, we want to give you a writing prompt to get started and get your creative juices flowing. You're going to create a character by selecting 5 to 6 objects in your room or the space around you. 3 of the objects you choose will represent the want, fear, and need of your character, and the last 2 or 3 objects will represent the core traits and values of your character.
For example, if I had this stuffed octopus, maybe my character's afraid of deep water. However, maybe my calculator represents their want to go find a mathematician to help them solve a really hard calculus problem. But this bamboo plant actually represents their need to grow and be independent and solve that problem on their own. For example, the last 2 to 3 traits could be a pack of dice to represent that they're a risk taker, and a pair of glasses to represent that they're very brainy and studious.
And that is all for today. We hope that you enjoyed and learned something from this presentation and that you feel ready to at least start the process of writing novels, screenplays, or short stories. As always, we have a link to review your work you submit to us on the Huntington Beach Public Library's website under the Teen Masterclass section, and we're excited to see what you create. Bye!
Bye!